In transformation, there is a big difference running from something and running to something. Like when we're talking transformation, running from something gets us somewhere. But the goal is to run to something. This week I'm wrestling with 2 Corinthians chapter 12. 2 Corinthians chapter 12 is this interesting text that begins with Paul talking about boasting. And his boasting is actually a way of chastising the Corinthian church. Of looking at them and saying, listen, if anyone has a reason to boast, it's the person that has been shipwrecked multiple times, beaten multiple times with rods. I'm actually reading from chapter 11 right here. Has gone all over the world, been lashed for Christ, has preached the gospel to the ends of the earth. And yet Paul says, all that I am going to boast about is suffering. All I'm going to boast about is weakness. Whereas a lot of times what we struggle with is boasting about things that set us up instead of things that put us in the right perspective. Paul then begins in chapter 12 talking about this person. We don't really know if it's Paul or someone else, but this person that is caught up into the third heaven and is experiencing all kinds of inexpressible things that cannot be told, interacting with God in paradise. And Paul's going, I don't know if he was in the body, apart from the body, only God knows. He says that twice. But he's saying, I'd rather boast about something like that. Something that is beneficial. Something that is union with God-like. But then Paul gets on and he keeps going, and he says in verse 7 this interesting ending to a fascinating text. He says, therefore, in order to keep me from becoming conceited or boasting about the things that set me up as opposed to the things that keep me in my place, that give me the proper perspective, he says, I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me. Many commentaries and scholars have wrestled with, what is the thorn in the flesh? Is it Paul's eyesight? Is he not able to see? It's possible. I mean, at the end of one of his letters to the Thessalonican church, he says, this is Paul, this is how I write, 2 Thessalonians 3. And it says, see the big letters that I write? And some scholars believe it's because he couldn't see very well. But if you take the word thorn in the flesh and you trace it all the way through the Old Testament, consistently, thorn in the flesh is used to reference agents that are not of God, agents of the enemy, attacking the people of God, especially through false messages. He says, I was given a thorn in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take something away from me, to help me run from what was driving me insane, what was hurting me from my perspective. But the Lord said to me, my grace is sufficient for you. I was talking with my older brother this past week about this passage, and he said something that really I couldn't get away from. He said, I've always thought that when Jesus says, my grace is sufficient for you, that he was saying that because of my grace, you will be able to endure the thorn in the flesh. He said, but I'm not so sure that's what Paul is saying. And the more I wrestled with that, the more I wrestled with this concept that we have, that I struggle with in transformation, that I see in multiple people that I interact with, that we're more comfortable running from something, more focused on running away from something than running to something. And the same thing is how we even interpret, the same thing is true in the way we interpret this text. We typically think that grace sufficient for Paul, when Jesus says, my grace is sufficient for you, that he almost is saying like, hey, take grace and put it on like a coat to help you get through the cold winter. A metaphor that my wife once gave me. But the problem is that's not grace. That's not even the way it is functioning. Grace is not some coat that you put on just to help you endure. Grace is the whole atmosphere. It's the whole ecosystem. It is what you are running to. Sometimes I will talk with students, or I will be talking with people that are struggling. And I've heard this multiple times from old, young. I've heard this concept. My mom and my dad have hurt me so much. I don't want to be anything like them. I just don't want to be anything like my mom. One of the things I have found is the more that you focus on not wanting to be like someone, the more you actually become them. Why? Because you're spending your time dwelling on that which you don't want to become, instead of centering all of your heart, mind, soul, and energy on who you do want to become. And the same is true with this text. Paul was asking the Lord to help him to run away from something. In his case, a messenger of Satan, a thorn in the flesh. 3 times he says, Lord, help me get away from this. And the Lord said, instead of running away from something, I want to invite you to run toward something. Because if you focus more on who you want to become than who you don't want to become, then your mind will be meditating, your mind will be dwelling on the holy picture of Christ. Becoming like Christ is a better way to orient your mind and your meditation than not wanting to become like a parent, or not wanting to become like that person that hurt you, or not wanting to be running to something is the path to transformation, not running away from something. This is something I've also understood even in my parenting with my children. Oftentimes, and it's appropriate early on, we teach them, when it comes to right and wrong, we teach them more about running away from than we do running to. Listen, if we focus on Christ's grace more than we focus on the thorn in our flesh, we will be able to not only deal with the thorn in the flesh, but to become someone truly worthy of carrying the gospel, truly worthy, as Paul says, about boasting. How as absurd as that sounds. So here's what I want to give you for the challenge for the week. This week, ask yourself this question. Who do I want to run to? What are the qualities? Who do I want to become? What's the picture? But don't focus on the thorns. Focus on the grace. And what you will find is that Christ's grace is definitely sufficient for you. I love you all. Have a great week.